Well, I mean, it's certainly got Albertans riled up. So Alberta, they're looking at Mark Carney, and they see a guy that's going to threaten our livelihood. We're an oil and gas province, and he's just another one of these Laurentian elites who is going to clamp down on our production, tax us, redistribute our wealth, and give us nothing in return. And so there's a big sovereignty movement developing in Alberta. And in fact, Danielle Smith, our premier, I think the day or two after the election, basically she lowered the threshold to call a referendum for a citizen-led referendum. From, I don't know, it was pretty high bar. Now she set it to a much lower bar. So she only needs, I think, 70,000 or 100,000 signatures or people to call a referendum.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 306. I'm talking to Tim Moen, who is the former leader of the Canadian Libertarian Party. He lives in Alberta, and we're going to talk about the recent Canadian elections, what that means, where Canada is going. And Tim is also in Alberta, so we're hoping we can, maybe make Alberta an American state. I don't know how Tim feels about that, but we'd love to have them, and we could trade. Maybe we could trade Minnesota or for Alberta. That might be a good deal. So how are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great, all things considered. Sun is shining today. I got brisket on the smoker outside. Just living up to our, I guess, reputation as being the Texas of the North.
The Texas of Canada, maybe Texas is the Alberta of the U.S. Yeah,
there you go.
The stampede, the oil. There's definitely similarities up there. You're prettier up there. I'll give you that, and it does get colder. So
yeah, there's trade-offs.
Yeah. And so many people in Texas don't even know that hockey exists. But
right.
But yes, it's so let's see what tell us about this election. We got this new guy, Carney. He's going to be the prime minister. What can you just tell us about the overall makeup of these elections, and where do you think Canada's going to go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a raucous few months up here politically in Canada. The Liberal Party was destined for the dustbin of obscurity back in December, when Justin Trudeau was still at the helm of the party. He was the leader of the party and prime minister. And, they were polling. The Conservatives were on track to win a sweeping majority. People were tired of Trudeau. They wanted him gone. The Liberals were projected to get maybe not even enough seats to maintain official party status in Canada. And so they were basically on their last legs. And there was some internal, I guess, conflict. An MP that was kind of close to Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland.
Yeah, member of parliament, MP, yes.
Yeah, member of parliament. And she basically said she can't support. She stepped down from, I believe, a cabinet position, or was fired from one or something. And that was kind of the final straw for everyone. Then all the other MPs started to find some courage and say, yeah, it's time for a leadership change. We can't have this guy leading us into the next election, or we're done. And so Trudeau, under pressure, stepped down as leader, and Mark Carney became leader, and therefore became prime minister of Canada. And it was very quickly, as soon as he became prime minister, the poll numbers changed. The Canadian public quickly shifted their voting preference to Liberal. And so we could see, as soon as Trudeau was gone and Carney was the front man, Canadians finally felt safe in parking their vote with Carney. And so a lot is made of the sort of Trump tariffs as being the nail, or being what cost the Conservatives the election. And I think there might be a little bit of truth to that, but I think it was more, the polling was showing the Liberals in a clear lead long before Trump's tariffs became announced or threatened. It was simply a matter of people hated Trudeau, right? So they were going to park their vote with Poilievre rather than Trudeau. They're going to kind of hold their nose and vote Poilievre, who was kind of branded by the media as kind of a far right figure. Painted. He definitely didn't get a lot of good media play, and he kind of comes across to the Canadian public as kind of schmarmy, arrogant. You see him, and you kind of like that in the leader of the opposition, because he was really good at holding Trudeau's feet to the fire. But Canadians, I got the sense just from man on the street, from my coworkers, from people in real life, that they were going to vote Pierre, but they weren't going to be enthusiastic about it just to get Trudeau out. And so as soon as they had another option other than Trudeau, Mark Carney, this guy who kind of comes across as a competent, kind of fatherly, steadfast figure, well, that was the safest vote for Canadians. And so the Liberals came in with a near majority. They picked up a few more seats, I think, this time than they had last time. And they're, I think, 4 seats short of a majority. So now there's some wheeling and dealing with the NDP party, which was almost swept to obscurity under Jagmeet Singh's horrendous leadership.
That's the New Democratic Party. Yes.
Yeah. So I think they're offering some of the MPs there, giving them offers at cabinet positions if they'll switch over to the Liberal Party, and then the Liberals will have a majority and be able to, or Mark Carney will be able to have his way with Canada.
Is the New Democratic Party, I guess, what you'd call the more extreme socialist party, or where are they?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're perceived that way by the Canadian public, but they certainly have their roots in socialism. They're focused on labor. They're focused on workers' rights. Jagmeet Singh's constant cry about why prices were so high at the grocery store was corporate greed. Corporate greed is why cost of living is so high. Of course, he couldn't. I mean, it's a simpleton explanation, as you and I know. I mean, it's not like corporations suddenly became greedy and they were never greedy before. I mean, it doesn't explain things. But so that's kind of so he's all about redistributionism, all about the welfare state, all about unions and bumping up the working class, and at the expense of producers and the productive. And so, yeah, he's definitely, the NDP has definitely got its roots in the socialist realm. Although, I know a few NDP politicians, and they certainly don't strike me as ideologues. They're not, I'm sure they haven't read any Marx or any of that kind of stuff. The ones that I know, they just kind of like the progressive kind of nice, empathetic tone of the party that fits with their personality, and that's why they are NDP politicians.
Certainly. And what can you tell us about the Bloc Québécois? I mean, that's basically a Quebec independence party, correct? Or
yeah, I mean, they are a party, a federal party. It's strange. They only run in Quebec, like they only run in Quebec ridings. They don't run in any other ridings. And their explicit aim is to represent Quebec sovereignty, Quebec interests, protect Quebec culture. And so it is kind of wild to see them hold the balance of power in Parliament now. I know last election there was another party, an upstart party called the Maverick Party, that wanted to do something similar in Western Canada. So they were running candidates in Western Canada trying to, I guess, foment a Western separatist sentiment. And, they didn't get very far at all. They kind of, seen as a fringe party and didn't get very many votes. So, yeah, that's the Parti Québécois.
Well, yeah.
Québécois.
And to explain, a riding is just another word for a district.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what we call districts here in Canada.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Most of the ridings up there also are named by the geographic region, whereas in America they're often just like Texas has the 1st congressional district, the 20th congressional district. It's a little more descriptive, but yeah. So,
right.
I was surprised. You might call it the Prairie Party or something like that. Maybe Alberta, Saskatchewan, because I think there's definitely more of it's really the more country part of Canada, I'd call it, as opposed to the urban centers around, say, maybe the whole corridor from Windsor, Ontario, all the way up to Montreal and Quebec City. That's all a very urban area now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and that area, we call that we call the folks that live there the Lawrentian elite, right? They kind of run Canada, and so out west here, our I guess independent streak is kind of based on screw Ottawa. I mean, we get nothing out from Ottawa. All they ever do is take, and we don't get anything back for it. We've got a raw deal in Confederation. We have these elitists, the Laurentian elite running the show, and we don't get a voice. Quebec has kind of a different flavor of separatism. Theirs is more aspirational. It's not so much about screw Ottawa as let's celebrate what is Quebecois, our language, our culture, what makes us who we are. They have a very strong identity. Our identity is based on not Ottawa, not those guys.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's, really you see yourself as descendants of Englishmen, and they see themselves as descendants of the French. It's just
yeah,
really,
that's
it's because it's all about the language, really. I mean,
well, and I don't think it's even so much language or English versus French out here, because we are a fairly diverse population. I mean, we are immigrants from all over the world. For example, my ancestors moved here. They fled Stalinist Russia and, came to Alberta. And you have all sorts of kind of economic and political refugees from all over the place coming to Western Canada because it was a land of opportunity. And so it's definitely not a homogenous, it's much more like America here. It's much more like we're the independent people fleeing the king or the crown or wherever we're coming from to create some opportunity for ourselves. So we have an independent streak. So there's not a central kind of identity or culture holding us together. It's kind of like a bunch of libertarians, right? Like it's like herding cats, right? We just want to be left alone, and they won't leave us alone.
Well, it's going out and conquering the wild frontier too. I mean, we really, I mean, I can imagine there are places in the 48 states where I won't get cell phone reception, but I'm absolutely positively sure there are places in Canada where I won't get cell phone reception.
Definitely.
because you're just so sparsely populated. There's just so much more wide open space up there. I just wonder what was the motivation for your parents to leave Russia? That's a great story all in itself. I got to hear this.
Yeah, well, it was my great grandparents, and my great grandfather hacked a homestead and a farm out of the Siberian wilderness, and he was at the time, they were Mennonites, so they actually spoke German. They were German Mennonites.
Oh, Volga Germans, maybe, or where were they?
I'm not
I don't know. Yeah, that's
100% sure where they came from before they were in Russia, but he stood up to a couple of bosses, I guess, people like kind of wannabe oligarchs that were giving unfair wages and working conditions. And so he was kind of seen as a leader, community leader. And he writes, he's got his, luckily he wrote a memoir talking about what life was like. And so I have a very firsthand account of exactly what life was like on the ground. And he talked about as when the communists started to rise in popularity, and he said, you know, it made sense to his Christian sensibilities, that the idea of giving to the least of these, right? Of to, you know, what's the communist motto again?
From each according to his ability, to each according
To
to
each
his
according to his
needs.
needs. Yeah, he said that kind of meshed with his Christian sensibilities. Of course, his Christian sensibility was that was a voluntarily taken on responsibility, not one that was foisted on you. But nonetheless, he kind of agreed with that. And then, you know, he eventually got branded a kulak because he had a productive farm. The young people in his village started becoming Communist Party members and demanding more and more and having an entitled attitude. And they started demanding more and more from his farm until he couldn't give any more. And eventually, you know, the secret police came and put a gun on the table and said, listen, you're a community leader. Here's what we want you to say at the community meeting tonight to support us. And he had a decision to make. He saw the writing on the wall, and he was like, well, he wanted, you know, he was kind of talks about what to do, right? Like, does he violate his conscience, or does he, so he basically said, look, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I won't speak in favor of your thing, but I won't speak against it either. And and then within short order, he was like, we gotta get out of Dodge. This is not going to go well for us. They're barely able to survive because they kept taking more and more food from them. And they moved to, they went to, I think, whether it was Moscow or St. Petersburg, but then they spent the next 18 months trying to get a passport to get out of Russia and to Canada. But they weren't really issuing passports at the time. And while he was there, basically living in an encampment with his family, several of his children died of smallpox. And it was a rough time, but he eventually got one of the last passports they issued to get out of Dodge and immigrated to Alberta, came to Alberta. They lived in a grain bin in southern Alberta because they couldn't afford anything else. Some farmer that was there let them stay in his grain bin. He planted crops in the ditch because he couldn't own any land, and eventually built up wealth and flourishing, and did quite well for himself, as did his family and extended family, just because of that Mennonite work ethic and charity and community mindedness. And so, you know, this was the land of opportunity compared to what he was fleeing. And that, you know, so it's maybe partly why freedom is in my DNA to a large extent, you know, hearing those stories growing up and understanding the insidiousness of well-meaning people pushing an evil ideology, and letting that happen eventually led to my people fleeing, you know, my family fleeing the farm that they worked so hard to build. And the ones that didn't flee, his family members that didn't flee, ended up dying in a work camp. So, you know, it was death or flight. And so we need to, I think part of why I fight and, you know, I'm engaged politically is because I don't want to see the same thing happen here. There's very few places left to flee now.
This was
No
in the
more frontiers.
1920s. This was in the 1920s when he did this.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the 20s.
You never got to, did you get to know him, or was he gone?
I just knew him as a young kid, like, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And that's it. So I didn't understand anything back then. They were just frail, old, sweet little couple that were my great grandparents. But, you know, certainly my grandparents, they were kids that came from that era as well. Right. So they understood very well. And it explained a lot about, why my grandmother had this fetish to, like, need to always jam food in my mouth and make me eat and say I'm too skinny. And, you know, they were just always focused on food. And the other thing, you know, that really stands out about them was how their character and their faith. You know, I remember my grandmother kneeling beside the bed 3 times a day in prayer, and you know, coming like it just calmed her, and it centered her, and it was something about that. And I mean, I'm an atheist, right? So uh, I eulogize my grandmother, and knowing um, how important her faith was to her, and what an impact it made on me to see her just always full of love, and you know, never a stern word, never uh, you know, and just that devotion to a purpose, a calling that was higher than herself. That left an impression on me. And so, you know, at her eulogy, I had to reconcile my atheism with what I saw in my grandmother. And, you know, I talked about the lessons I learned, um, and that idea of focusing on something greater than yourself, and love, and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, what a legacy they left for us. And, you know, I'm hoping that we don't squander it.
I hope so too. You know, there's just nowhere, because where else is there left to go? You know, Tim, there might be, you know, Argentina, but
Yeah.
you know, I worry so much about the English speaking world, and I could just say about America, said, well, at least we're not any of these other countries. But so yeah, that's a great story. So your grandparents came over as kids, but your you never got to know your great grandparents though.
That's right. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I got to know him through his memoir. I didn't even realize that memoir existed. It was actually the day before I was eulogizing my grandmother, I came across it, and I stayed up all night reading this thing, and it really put things into context. I couldn't put it down. It just made my family make so much more sense. Um, Seeing it all fleshed out like that.
Yeah, you know, sometimes I feel sad. You know, that's one thing I don't like about the, you know, people having kids later and stuff, is we're gonna have so many kids who never even get a chance to know their grandparents. Since I think that's valuable, and you know, and a lot, and most, still say most people probably never do know a great grandparent, but
Yeah.
so yeah. So these elections happen. So Mark Carney's looks like he's a little bit older than Trudeau. So now what we have is the Liberals have 168 seats. The Conservatives have 144. The Bloc Québécois has 23. The New Democratic has 7, and then there's the Green Party, which has 1.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there a Green Party and a New Democratic Party? What are the differences there?
Well, there's a lot of parties. I mean,
Yeah,
the
be happy that you have a lot of parties, Tim.
yeah,
Believe me.
that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good question. The Green Party is focused on the environment, right? And they hold a seat on Vancouver Island, the West Coast, right, where it's all about granola crunching and hugging trees. And they're very focused on nature and protecting nature, and so I guess the Green Party speaks more to them than the NDP, because they stand for a lot of the things the NDP stand for, but their real focus is on the climate emergency and hugging trees. So.
Oh, but that area, you can't blame them, because that area is so
Oh, it's a
pretty.
beautiful, yeah,
That
yeah,
area. I was in Vancouver last year, and I lived in Northwest Washington.
yeah,
Washington is the prettiest of all the 46 states I've seen, but I've not
yeah.
been to Alaska, Hawaii, but yeah, it's just so, and the area around British Columbia. I actually drove a little bit up, like an hour from Vancouver and back. Yeah, it's so beautiful over there.
Yeah, and Elizabeth May, their party leader, is a force of nature. I mean, she is a
Yeah.
Canadian kind of fixture. She just has a like undeniable work ethic, and is just loves the parliamentary system. There's even some talk that Carney might make her Speaker of the House because of her, you know, just she's kind of revered in a lot of ways in a lot of circles. It's just that she has a cuckoo nutty kind of ideology and belief system. But you know, I've met her a few times, and done joint events with her in opposition to laws that we both hated. And so, I've got to know her a little bit, and, I generally find her a nice person, likable and stuff. And there's a lot to admire about her. But so I can see why the folks in her riding would vote for her. I mean, she's just an undeniable. I mean, she probably knocked all the doors 2 or 3 times, right? I'm sure she's just
Yeah. How
a
many?
workhorse.
What is the average population of a riding up there?
It's probably 70 to 100,000, I'd say.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. You can still. Well, maybe you need people with you, but you can still,
Yeah.
maybe win an election by
Oh yeah.
getting several people to knock on doors. But it's here it's almost 700,000. So
Right.
it's
Yeah, it's
really
impossible.
that it really is becoming just a logistical problem. You have about 1/10 the population that we do.
Yeah.
So that's really, the representatives are closer to the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. We see our representatives on the street all the time. I know my member of parliament, see them at events. Same with my provincial MLAs, members of the provincial legislature. So yeah, it's pretty easy to hold them to, or not really to hold them to account, but to talk to them.
MLAs. What's
Yeah.
that?
Member of Legislative Assembly.
Oh,
So
is that
those
like?
are those are provincial. That would be like, I don't know what your provincial politicians are called, but
Yeah,
are
well,
your state
we have different names from down
state
here. We just call
representatives?
always state representatives. In some states, they have state senators, and some states they're called that. Some states it's called the House of Delegates in the state Senate.
Oh, okay.
There are various names. State representative is pretty much member legislative assembly. I mean, yeah, we have our own, and certainly you have your own provincial system. It's a so with this election, so you don't think Trump had that much of an impact on Carney winning then?
I don't know that it was a huge impact, because from what I recall, I mean, I predicted Carney was going to win handily well before
Mhm.
the tariffs came in, just based on the polls I was seeing and the people I was hearing from. Certainly, um, Trump helped him. I mean, it definitely didn't hurt Carney. Um, but yeah, I think it's a bit overblown how much Trump was an impact on this election. I think it was going to Carney whether Trump implemented tariffs or not.
Not have. Some people do say that Canada very much has this identity of we're not Americans. Don't call us Americans. Is that fair to
Oh,
say? Or
I think that's true for sure. I mean, we kind of see most Canadians kind of hold their nose up at America and the system you guys have down there. Not me. I mean, I look up to it in a lot of ways. But, in Canada, we have free healthcare, don't you know? And we have progressive
oh, yeah.
values, and we don't have, school shootings and this degradation that this horrible, American culture and government creates. So yeah, definitely, the idea, especially to those kind of that love the Laurentian elite and all they propagate, would certainly hold their nose at America and balk at the idea of becoming a 51st state.
Yeah, I like that, as you call it, the Laurentian elite. Yeah. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's also where because there's a lot more money, and that's where a lot of the media center is too, right? Isn't it around Toronto or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's media in Vancouver and all the big cities, but yeah, the Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal, that's kind of, where Canada is run from.
Well, Toronto and there is some in Vancouver is also where some of the TV and movie productions happening too.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's
Because
a lot of,
because isn't Vancouver a lot more like the Laurentian elite as well? Or
they're very progressive. Yeah. They're progressive for sure there. Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah, they're definitely, I mean, it's like California, right?
in some ways, I've got to say, Tim, I still remember this was a while back though. Was it after the Stanley Cup when Vancouver lost and people went out and rioted, and the next day, a bunch of people came out with brooms and dustpans and said, "We're cleaning up our city." That would never happen in America.
Right.
That is something I got to look at and say, I love this. This is beautiful. Really, that's something to be proud of as a Canadian. That all your people just went out and said, "We're going to clean up our city," and I think that's great.
I that's true. That's true.
But there's some things sometimes we get these lectures occasionally. I just want to say, shut up. And Tim, you got to say too, we love your comedians and we love your game show hosts. You've sent us a lot of great comedians. John Candy, some people like that.
Jim Carrey, Mike Myers, Steve Martin, or not Steve Martin, Martin Short.
All those other people from the Second City, it's just and of course the game show has Alex Trebek, Monty Hall, Jim Perry. So that's because we don't have any quotas on whether or not you have to be you can be from any country and host a game show. You've certainly got some of your own. I've heard also though that Carney was very much preferred by the older Canadians, and Poilievre was very much preferred by the younger Canadians. Is that true?
Yeah, I'd say that's fairly true. I mean, definitely boomers loved Carney. I mean, the polls definitely showed they were strong Liberal supporters, Carney supporters. But I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, the fear mongering is that the Conservatives are going to take away your pensions and your benefits and all the stuff that you rely on as an aging senior. So, I expect that will pretty much always be the case. But and I think there's something to the idea of just the personality. Like Carney is an old school kind of figure, right? He's reminiscent of the politicians we saw in the 70s and 80s, just kind of steadfast, monotone, statesman-like. Whereas Poilievre was more of a firebrand, kind of comes across as cocky. I don't know if you've seen some of the interviews with him, but he's kind of combative and, a little bit Trumpian in some of them, but certainly not bombastic. But I mean, he was also very brilliant in Parliament at calling out Trudeau, like just very good at articulating and devastating takedowns. But again, that kind of adversarial tone doesn't necessarily sit well with the more polite kind of boomers and older crowd, right? It might appeal more to the younger people who feel like they're really getting the raw end of the deal here. Can't buy a house, cost of living, can't get a good job, all those things. I mean, the boomers are set and they don't want this firebrand ruining that for them. Certainly.
Yeah, there's certainly, it sounds like a lot of the problems you're facing up there are very similar to the ones that we're facing.
Sure.
And there's really, there's a delicate sweet spot of, being rude and edgy you take it to a certain place where you inspire people and get people excited. But if you go too far, you start alienating people and scaring people away. Javier Milei is right on the sweet spot. He's right where he needs to be. If he was a little more rude, he would turn people off, and he was a little more meek, he wouldn't excite people as much. But it's hard to find that spot. Maybe, and of course he is a little younger. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, he was born in 1979. I see pictures of him. Yeah, it's a picture of him here actually at a Holodomor memorial, which is certainly something I can approve of. It's what is the election schedule? It seems like the elections are always moving around in Canada. Am I right about that or wrong? Or
I mean, the prime minister can call an election, I think pretty much any time. And there's a maximum amount of, obviously he can't wait 8 years or anything like that. There's a window he has to call it by. But sometimes, I mean, they called it early. Like Carney certainly could have waited till Like he didn't have to call it till the fall. But he did the smart thing and looked at the polls and said, well, I'm hot right now. Lord knows where I'll be in 6 months after 6 months of running this country. So let's cement this deal right now. And he called an election. And I mean, originally I remember going on a few podcasts and saying, because when the Liberals were having their leadership race, I looked at the field and I saw Mark Carney in there. Mark Carney has been kind of a fixture in Canadian politics. He hasn't been involved politically, but he's been, he ran the Bank of Canada. Eventually he ran the Bank of England. So he's a central banker, and he was kind of well respected as this economist. And he was basically giving Justin Trudeau his playbook he's Justin Trudeau's advisor. And, I saw him as a very dangerous man. He has a couple books out, but you read his book Values, and it reads of a guy, a very intelligent guy who's full of hubris and is, believes in it basically reads like Klaus Schwab's book, right? I don't know if you've read Klaus Schwab's, what is
I've
it?
not.
But it's basically this idea that we need to redistribute wealth and limit carbon and save the environment, and the economy needs to be based on that stakeholder capitalism rather than profits or whatever. So he's got a bunch of quips in his book, like how the gold standard was created all sorts of economic problems. Like he blamed economic busts on the gold standard, and how great it was that we moved off it to central banking and fiat. So I mean, the guy is just full. He's got all the wrong positions, but he comes across as very intelligent and he's the epitome of an expert. And so Canadians hand him all their trust, and there you go.
Yeah, so many times it just seems like these parties have become or at least the left-leaning parties, it's really the party of this expert class or managerial class where they'll just run everything and it works. And I don't think it always does. I do think a lot of the people are getting fed up with that. I don't know if it's happening with you or not. So any good news to come out of this election? Or
well, I mean, it's certainly got Albertans riled up. So Alberta, they're looking at Mark Carney, and they see a guy that's going to threaten our livelihood. We're an oil and gas province, and he's just another one of these Laurentian elites who is going to clamp down on our production, tax us, redistribute our wealth, and give us nothing in return. And so there's a big sovereignty movement developing in Alberta. And in fact, Danielle Smith, our premier, I think the day or two after the election, basically she lowered the threshold to call a referendum for a citizen-led referendum. It was pretty high bar. Now she set it to a much lower bar. So she only needs, I think, 70,000 or 100,000 signatures or people to call a referendum. So basically that now opens up the door for a citizen who's interested in Alberta sovereignty to force a referendum. I mean, it's similar, I guess, the way she's selling it is, look, I'm just doing making it more like California. I mean, California has all these ballot initiatives and referendums on different initiatives. That's what we're going to do for Alberta here, right? She's like, I don't plan to advancing a separatist motion or initiative, but there's nothing stopping the people from doing that, and I want to make it possible for the people to advance the initiatives that are. So she's being very coy with this, right? She's not going to advance separatism herself. She's going to push back on Ottawa, as she has done throughout her reign as premier. And and this is just another way, I think, for her to do that. And of course, it's raised a bunch of. So immediately, I signed a petition this morning. It's already got over 200,000 signatures, and there's Alberta Prosperity Project. There's a bunch of stuff kicking off now of people that really want to call a referendum, because under we have something called the Clarity Act in Canada, and it basically says it allows, it's an act, that a piece of law that allows a province to secede if certain thresholds are met. So one of the thresholds is that it has to there has to be a clear majority on a clear question of separation. So if we get a clear majority, and I don't think it specifies in there what a clear majority is. I think that would eventually have to be challenged in court. Is it 50% plus one, or is it more like a super majority, like 75%?
Yeah.
I suspect that that would be hotly debated. But I suspect in the not too distant future, we will have a referendum on separation from Canada. And so it's interesting times for Alberta right now. And the other thing that's happened is a bunch of the First Nations reserves have sent letters to Danielle Smith, basically saying, over our dead body, will you engage in this separatist activity? We have sacrosanct treaties with the Crown. We're basically faithful to the Crown. And this is our land, all of Alberta. You are here at our kind of, I guess, at our privilege, and we will not allow this to happen. So that's going to raise all sorts of interesting things here in the next coming years.
Yeah, that could be very interesting. I don't know what their relations are. It's not, most Americans aren't really proud of what happened with the indigenous here, but I don't know how it works out in Canada, if you have any reserves up there or not. But yeah,
I mean, I suspect it's very similar. We call them First Nations because they are kind of quasi nations. They're allowed self-governance, but most of these reserves are basically run with kind of communist policies, right? And that, by that I mean, you're not allowed to own the house you're in. The house is given to you by the band, and those that curry more favor are better behaved, get better houses than those who aren't, right? And so these people, I asked a buddy of mine who lives on a First Nation reserve, well, why wouldn't it be better if you guys owned your own houses? Well, he said the fear there is that you could then sell it to an outsider, and then so it's basically, it made me think that this is what ethno-nationalism looks like. I mean, you would have to enact some laws like this to prevent the sale of property to people that the ethno-state doesn't want in its borders, right?
you could just make it a homeowners association, I guess, or
I guess, yeah.
Where the association would have to approve all sales.
Yeah, but as a result of this, of course, the poverty is rampant, even though there's plenty of opportunity for these folks in terms of tax benefits, tax breaks,
yes,
redistribution, and there are a few kind of free market capitalistic chiefs that allow their people to own property, and those bands do much better because they leverage that property for education, to start a business, to do all sorts of different things. So it is a bunch of, it's not one homogenous, the First Nations here aren't one homogenous thing. They're a bunch of individual little nations that all have a deal with the Crown. And one of the ways they actually kind of get a raw deal is that they get surface rights to the land that they walk on, but they don't have mineral rights. The Crown maintains its right to own all those resources under their feet. So, for example, in the oil sands region where I lived for about 15 years in Fort McMurray, there's billions of dollars of oil reserves underneath the feet of these people who, you could say certainly in that area, that land belongs to those people. They were there before anyone else. They homesteaded it. They, by any rules of property ownership, you would say those individuals certainly have right to control that property. But the Crown then says, oil companies, you can go in there and take those resources out from under their feet. And so, when I was campaigning on the Libertarian platform, I said, look, this is a raw deal. This is you ought to have full property ownership over that land that we can delineate as yours. And then you can manage the resources how you want, or you can make whatever deals you want, right? If and the way they mine, it's tar sand or oil sands. And the traditional way of mining it is just like open pit mine. Like you just dig up the overburden, the soil on top, and then there's all this. It's like, it's oil sand. That's the best way to describe it. It's sand that is full of oil. And so it's this tarry, sandy mixture, and you just bucket it up, put it in big dump trucks, and then you separate the sand from the oil and ship it off to market. Well, that destroys a lot of the pristine nature that these people enjoy, right? So, if I would tell bands that, look, if I owned your band, what I would do, this just me,
yes,
I would say, okay, I want to preserve a lot of this or most of this for my grandkids, my descendants, to enjoy our traditional nature way of life. But I'm also not going to sentence my people to poverty. So we're going to live rich as Saudi kings off the oil under our feet here. We're going to allow oil companies to mine oil sands in the least invasive way possible. And there's technology that now you don't have to dig up the dirt to get it. You can put pipes down and inject steam and extract it that way. And they have to return that parcel of land that we allow them to develop to a pristine state of nature before they can go to the next land and develop it. And they're going to have to put $3 billion into escrow that ensures that they return that land. The only way they get that money back is if they return that land. And if they don't, we're going to use that money to return that land to a pristine state of nature, and they can never come back. That's how a property owner would deal with that kind of development on their land. Compare that to what's happening now, which is you get to say your piece at an engagement session, and it's lip service, and then they come in and do whatever they want anyways, give you some money, control everything about the process, and keep you impoverished essentially. So the oil company and the government's getting rich, but you guys are getting peanuts. And that's a pretty popular kind of stance there. But
I remember Peter Gorman would tell the story about getting to know a tribe in the Amazon. And he said, well, I made sure they got land rights, air rights, water rights, and mineral rights. And that's what you have to do. It's because sometimes you have this case where they're drilling oil and then they pollute all the water. And it's like, well, we didn't want you to pollute the water, and you're not giving, you work out something though, where everybody ends up benefiting.
Yeah. And that's what property rights does, right? I mean, it's a way to create a win-win. Yeah. As soon as you get the government involved, it creates a win-lose situation. So someone's losing. And so it creates all sorts of weird politics, right? Like on one hand, you have these chiefs cozying up to environmentalists that want to shut down oil and gas. And on the other hand, you have them the next week cozying up to oil and gas for the next big project, right? Because you think about, you put yourself in their shoes, you kind of have to play both sides, because you want your environment protected, but you also want a piece of the pie. You don't want to be impoverished, right? So, that's where capitalism comes in. It's a win-win situation. You can protect the environment on your terms and get wealthy on your terms, and you can figure out what the right balance is yourself without having to constantly appeal to these progressives and busybodies that exert their right over your land.
Yeah, I should clarify too for people listening. It's Danielle Smith, a female. So
that's right. Yeah.
I read also she's a fan of Ayn Rand, which doesn't look good. She looks like she's got some very, very much a libertarian streak. So this could be very interesting.
She is very, I think she describes herself as a libertarian. I've been on her talk show a number of times when I was a Libertarian Party leader. She was a radio talk show host before she got into politics. But she had been in politics before. She had been the leader of a party called the Wild Rose Party, and kind of soured on politics after a while. It's a dirty game, and she got done dirty. So she went to the private sector and got, but she went back and has been successful so far. But it's interesting to see. I think she's probably my favorite Canadian politician. That's not me. That's not a libertarian, because of that libertarian streak. She's not perfect. There's a lot of things, but what she does is she tries to play the pragmatic game, and I think she does it about as well as you can. Like Poilievre I get the sense that he has a fairly libertarian streak in him too, just listening to him talk and knowing people that are kind of in his inner circle. If you listen to him on Jordan Peterson or one of these long form podcasts, he very, very clearly speaks from an Austrian economic lens, right? And says all the things that a libertarian likes to hear. And I think he believes strongly in all these things, but he is also trying to get elected. And in Canada, you have to sacrifice all those principles to get elected, right? You have to promise freebies. You definitely can't threaten socialist healthcare. You have to pay off private interests or different special interest groups. And you have to promise all these things if you want to get elected. You have to pander and sacrifice. And so, my big, I guess, criticism of conservatives or libertarian conservatives over the years has been they play this pragmatic game that basically confines them once they get into office. And so government continues to grow under them. It grows at maybe a slower pace, but they certainly never seem to restrain government in any meaningful way. So that's the game that Poilievre plays, and kind of bit him. He didn't even win his own seat. He didn't win his riding. I see now today, actually, they just announced that another MP is going to step down in Alberta in an Alberta riding, and Poilievre is going to run in that riding to replace him. So, someone fell on their sword for him, which, might not have been the right thing to do. I mean, Poilievre, I don't know that he's electable now in Canada.
It's hard.
I mean, as a prime minister, he'll certainly win his seat in Alberta, but
I realize it's just a matter of somebody else is trying to make you his useful idiot, and you're trying to make him your useful idiot. So it's a matter of who's going to be the useful idiot, and who's going to be the one who uses the useful idiot.
Yeah, that's a good way of.
It seems like the libertarians end up being used more than they use other people, I think.
Well, and this happens all the time. I mean, Stephen Harper was very cozy with the libertarians when he started his rise, and he, back in the late 90s, there was kind of two parties. There was the Progressive Conservative Party and the Reform Party. They were on the right, and they continually split the conservative vote. The Reform Party was much more libertarian, had a bunch of libertarians in their midst. Stephen Harper united the parties under the United Conservative Party, and paid lip service to libertarians, welcomed them in his fold, got what he needed from them. Cut to about 10 years later at a Manning conference, which is a big conservative conference in Canada, and he's decrying libertarians as the anathema to Western civilization or something like that. Like he just threw them under the bus. That happens over and over again in conservative politics. They like libertarians until they get what they need from them, and then they kick them to the curb because they can't stand us anymore.
There isn't anything we haven't been called. There isn't anything we haven't been blamed for. I mean, it's just that way anymore. It's and to his credit, I think Milei has figured out how to make other people.
Milei has figured it out, and I haven't figured. I think it's it's like the right season in Argentina for Milei, right? Like just the right confluence of environment meets opportunity, meets preparation, kind of thing. And I think things have to get pretty bad before they would consider something like that. But
I just don't want to see it get that way, Tim. And
Yeah.
I think we've got other cultural problems up here that they don't have. Canada. I'm curious too, though. Why is there? What's the deal with? There's the Libertarian Party, but what's the deal with the People's Party? And like Maxime Bernier,
Yeah.
is he somewhat libertarian, or what's the deal? What's the difference there?
I'm trying to wrap my head around it too. Like, I'm like trying to figure out if I'm voting in this election, like if I want to cast a principled vote, I'm going libertarian. If I want to cast a pragmatic vote, I'm going with the Conservative Party. And I'm personally trying to figure out where the PPC is. Listen, this is Maxime Bernier and I kind of have a history. When he was running for leadership, before he was running for leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, we identified him. Some of us libertarians identified him as a libertarian leaning or sympathetic conservative. He constantly talked about Austrian economics. He was certainly good on economics. He said the right things. And so we're like, okay, if someone's going to lead the Conservative Party, it should be this guy, because this guy, if we give him support and help him win that election, next time a federal election comes up, maybe your boy here can get on the debate stage. Maybe he'll help us get on that debate stage, because just one of the things that I think a libertarian conservative could use on that federal debate stage or on the dais with them is someone pulling the Overton window further towards liberty, in a radical or solidly principled way, that, so that they could come in then with their moderately libertarian policy and not be branded an extremist, right? No, that the extremist is over there. I've got a moderate policy, because you see this happen on the left in Canada. It's a very left leaning dais, right? So when you have Elizabeth May and Jagmeet Singh saying their crazy leftist spiel, the Liberals' leftist spiel sounds centrist and moderate to everyone else and reasonable, right? Whereas if they were alone up there, everyone might balk at some of their ideas, be like, oh, that's kind of crazy. But no, next to these guys, so my pitch would have been, you need me up there, Max, to make your policies, to give you the most room to play in the Overton window, right? I'll help pull that Overton window over. I'll take the sacrificial hits. I'll be branded the villain, the radical, or whatever. You can come smack dab in the middle of that Overton window that I shifted over for you, and actually maybe punch some policies through that we'll all like. And that was going to be my pitch, right? So we helped Max try to win. Well, first of all, we flew him out to Western Canada, connected him with a bunch of people, wined him and dined him, and convinced him to throw his name in the race for leader of the Conservative Party. And during that race, he was branding himself as the kind of the libertarian candidate. And he contrasted that to this other lady, Kelly Leach, who was running a very populist platform, very similar to Max's platform now, anti-immigration, all this stuff. And he was criticizing her very populist anti-immigrant Trump policies and coming at it from a libertarian angle. And he almost won. He came within 0.5% of winning the leadership. And then when he didn't win, I immediately went public and said, Maxime Bernier, why don't you come to the Libertarian Party? I'll step aside as leader. You can lead the party. You can take liberty to the next level. You've got a higher profile than me. I was getting tired at that point. I cashed in my retirement to do this, and it was time for me to get back to work and pay the bills. So who better to hand it off to this guy who could take it to the next level? And I think Max thought about it for about a year, hemmed and hawed, and we talked numerous times about it. And then eventually he went off and created this other party, the People's Party of Canada. It's kind of an unfortunate name in my opinion, but and the way he went about it, he was very clear. Like, he burned his bridges with the Conservative Party. He he started saying things that he knew were going to get him kicked out of caucus. Now he could have said things like, listen, taxation is theft. You know, the drug war is, unconscionable. The, overseas military adventurism is unprincipled. There's a number of things he could have said from a libertarian perspective that the Conservatives would have had to kick him out of caucus for. But instead, he went down the culture route and said multiculturalism is killing Canada. We have too many immigrants. The cult of blah, 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 whatever. He went with the culture war stuff and started a populist party. I think what happened was he saw which way the parade was going. There was a growing populist movement in Canada, and he wanted to get in front of that parade and capitalize on it. He realized he wasn't going to get very far in the Conservative Party. He'd lost his leadership. He was on the outs with the leadership of the party. They weren't listening to him in terms of policy recommendations. And so he's like, well, I'm not making any headway here. I mean, I've put in my time. I've got my 6-figure pension secured, so I can go off and do this other thing now that will probably be funner. And so instead of being a libertarian, though, he went the populist route because that's the way the parade was. So I don't know if Bernier is I don't know. He's a bit of a chameleon. He shifts, He was a separatist in the 90s. He was an establishment conservative in the 2000s. He was a libertarian in the leadership race, and now he's a populist. And he distances himself from libertarians. I mean, he went on Dave Rubin and said, he is more classical liberal. And Rubin asked him, well, what's the difference between a classical liberal and libertarian? Well, he said, well, we believe in regulating drugs, for example. It's pretty clear in his policies that he still has a soft spot in his heart for the state, right? Even when it comes to climate change, he put in he said, there's no climate emergency, therefore we don't need government to do anything about it. Well, that's not what a libertarian would say. A libertarian would say, if there's a climate emergency, we definitely don't need government to do anything about it, right? I mean, the implication of his statement is that, yeah, if there was an emergency, we need the government to step in. And we say, screw that. No, that's the wrong instinct altogether. The state, you're going to ask, yes. It's like asking a Satanist to solve a crisis in the church, no, that's wrong.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. It's funny, Tim, although he's never run for office, we could say that there was a similar trajectory with Stefan Molyneux.
Oh, I guess to some degree there is, although I guess I would
going from libertarian to becoming more of a populist, although he still says a lot of the right things. But
yeah, I mean, I listen to his podcast still, and he doesn't engage in much politics anymore, but he certainly still holds to voluntarist ideals, I would say. But I think we all have a bit more of a soft spot for populism. Like, I certainly acknowledge that unfettered migration is a problem. I won't deny that. It's just that my solution to that problem isn't more statism. So for example, my solution was, okay, how can we get the government out of immigration? Well, let's get them out of vetting. First of all, let's make it up to individual Canadians to take on the responsibility of vetting and financially backing and backing with liability the people that they sponsor coming into this country. Ideally, in a private property society, it would just be a matter of, you could have closed communities, you could have open communities, you could, engage in whatever kind of thing. But we don't have that right now. What we have, a lot of people call it anarcho-tyranny. And I think that's a bad, inaccurate, misleading phrase, right? And anarcho-tyranny is used to describe what's going on, for example, in city centers these days with the social degradation, the open drug scene, the looting, all this stuff that's happening, all this lawlessness that's that's happening, right?
Well,
And
for
what I
example, San Francisco says we won't prosecute shoplifters if it's
right,
less than $1,000 and stuff like that. I mean, it is because the government is not doing what it's supposed to do, but it's
yeah,
yeah.
right. And I would add to that this unfettered migration or immigration, right, where the state is just housing these people and taking over hotels and like just bring them all in. Government will cover the costs and do the
Well,
infrastructure, all that stuff,
that's the problem
and
with the
so
welfare state.
right, and so my term for that is not a narco tyranny; it's state imposed lawlessness. If that were a
Yeah,
privately owned city, for example, and I were the city owner, do you think I would tolerate that kind of stuff on my
no,
streets, that my citizens who are paying good money, who I have a contract with, by the way, to keep those streets, law and order, clean, a nice environment they can raise their families in. Um, I would not allow that stuff, right? I'm going to impose rules on what goes on because that's what my customers want and it's my property.
yeah,
And so that's how libertarians would deal with that stuff. And what we have now is state imposed lawlessness. It's not anarcho tyranny, because in an anarchy or a
yeah,
voluntary or private society, there would be rules. Private property owners have rules and people have to abide by them or they get ejected.
yeah. By the way, Tim, I don't know how much but people are talking a lot about building codes and housing regulations. Is that also driving up the cost of housing in Canada? Because Canada certainly is a lot more sparsely populated than we are. You wouldn't think you'd think housing and property would be cheap up there, but cheap land is usually cheap for a very good reason.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much building codes are. I just listened to Tom Woods podcast. He had a guy on that was talking about how building codes create
Yes.
more economic devastation than wars. And I want to learn more about this. I can't speak too much. I will say I know a little bit about it from a firefighting perspective. For example, there's a big push right now for developers that want to have single egress multi-story buildings. So a single stairwell in a building, right? Because it allows them to build on a smaller footprint and
Yes.
and have more dense housing. Firefighters are typically against this because we see it as dangerous. You
Oh,
can't
yes.
you can't fight fire. You can't go, and actually it was one of the contributing factors to, 72 deaths in the Grenfell Tower fire in London a few years back. They had a single stairwell. And so as a result, there was a shelter in place order, because you can't have people exiting while firefighters are going up the stairwell. It just hinders operation. So people sheltered in place and died. In fact, there
Oh,
were
yeah,
some
yeah.
people that were exiting that got sent back up to their room to shelter in place. So, So for example, a building code that prevents you from building a single stairwell building would certainly raise the cost of housing because it decreases the density that you can build. But I would say the biggest driver is probably there's plenty of land, but try to
Yeah.
get any of it. I mean, the Crown owns it. There's rules against obtaining that land to create a development and all sorts of things like that. So I think that's a big part of it as well. But also, housing prices go up, and not a lot of people talk about the fact that central banks jack up the housing prices by artificially lowering interest
Yeah.
rates. Housing prices. I mean, right now the rate interest rates are
Mhm.
coming down, and I work with a young fella who's been trying to get into a house, and he's having to bid. He had to bid $30,000 over asking price to get it. And houses are selling within a day or two. So there must be a scarcity of houses on top
Yeah.
of these low interest rates driving up prices that are creating this high cost of housing.
Yeah. Tim, you talked about, like an apartment building with one stairway. Wouldn't the insurance companies also put guidelines in place on something like this too, though, even if the government didn't? I mean, I would think, the insurance companies will say, look, we're going to insure your apartment building, but we think you should have 2 stairways instead of 1 because people are more likely to get killed. I mean, I would think insurance companies would also take a look at that, because there are some, having 2 stairways, there's some things that just seem like common sense to me, and if you have a big enough apartment, yes, you need 2 stairways. Apartment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much insurance plays into that. I'm guessing that the extra cost of insurance is probably outweighed by the amount of money you can make renting out or selling more units.
True.
But, and also I don't know how much of the risk is outsourced to the state by the insurance companies. This is kind of the history of the fire service, is that it was insurance companies that ran fire brigades, up until the Great Fire of London. And then, firefighter lore is that this is why the city government needed to take over firefighting service. While the real reason is, of course, the insurance company used it as an excuse to get rid of that operating cost. So they outsourced something that should have been theirs to do and do well, and they should have carried some liability for doing well, and they outsourced it to the city government instead. And and so they got off the hook from carrying that responsibility. And so my question is, how much responsibility do they actually carry? How much have they outsourced to the city to carry if something happens in terms of a catastrophe from the firefighting? Because the firefighting is now the city's responsibility. So if they don't effectively put out that fire, is that on the insurance company or is that on the city?
Yeah. And there are a lot of factors involved there. I have to say too, Tim, something that amazes me, and I when I've traveled and stayed in Airbnbs, I've stayed in some Airbnbs where you have to have a key to unlock the door to get out. And I'm like, wow. Yeah, you're a fireman. You're going nuts over that. Because you got to get out of the house. You got to get out of the house fast. You don't want to have to fumble around with keys.
That's right.
And this is something that doesn't really cost anything to fix. It's just common sense. And really, how much money does a second stairway cost? I mean, it doesn't seem like it should cost that much, or even if they put up those little fire escapes.
Yeah, I mean, I looked into it a little bit, and what happens is if you have multiple stairwells, it does quite dramatically expand the footprint of your building, because that's quite a bit more you have to build onto it. And so you end up with, you think about how hotels look, right? Motels where they have multiple stairwells in them, and they're long and broken up by a bunch of stairwells, right? And that's because of these codes that require a certain number of stairwells per occupant. Now, if that was a single stairwell allowed, you could build it much higher. You could build the same number of suites, but you could go up on a smaller footprint. Then you could subdivide that lot into a bunch more, and you could have multiple hotels on that lot that has one hotel because of the stairwell regulation. So, and I don't know what the right balance is. As a firefighter, I prefer to see there be multiple stairwells. But I mean, maybe if they could make it completely fireproof, there's no chance of a fire starting, why should I complain that there's only one stairwell if I'm never going to have to fight a fire there? Right. So, I mean, I'm sure but people need to be free to figure out and mitigate these risks themselves.
My dad's grade school had one of these fire escapes. It was like a little sliding board going down a tube, like a
right.
Said, boy, that looks like fun, Yeah, it was. So there's a lot of things I can do. Just, do you think if Alberta goes, do you think maybe Saskatchewan or Manitoba might want to go too, or anybody else, or is there?
There's definitely Saskatchewan and Alberta are very similar politically, and there is a big separatist movement right now in Saskatchewan as well. So, wouldn't be surprised to see them break off as well. I think it's likely that we're going to see actual independence? No. I think, first of all, I doubt there'd be a clear majority that would support it. I think that there'd be so much propaganda. I mean, our former premier, Jason Kenney, has come out and talked about how crazy independence is. And, Albertans, at least they're not extremists. I mean, there's a high proportionate of radicals and like hardcore independent people, but by and large, we're kind of middle of the road. Don't ruffle too much, don't rattle too many chains. So look, I just don't see us getting there. I don't think there's enough Albertans that are pissed off enough to go that route anytime soon. But maybe it'll give us some leverage with Ottawa to say, hey, you better start treating us better, because if you say you want a unified Canada, you better start providing us some value in this confederation, or we're going to have some problems.
Tim, what is the situation with free speech in Canada right now? It's getting worrisome in every country, even in America right now.
Whew. Yeah, I mean, we've never had great track record on free speech. We don't have the same protections you do in the US. We've had comedians fined by human rights commissions for jokes they tell, and yeah, it's nasty out there for sure. And our government regulates social media more than I think yours does. So, for example, in Canada, the government requires social media pay traditional media royalties to allow us as users to post news stories from them. So, on Facebook, for example, you can't post any news articles. That Meta has just decided we're not going to pay that. Mark Carney has made noises about how there's harmful speech out there that needs to be regulated. So I suspect things are only going to get worse from here on out. Challenge the establishment. And I mean, I just recently was permanently banned from Facebook and Instagram. I'm not even 100% sure why.
Yeah.
They said I violated a community standard on selling guns and drugs.
Yeah, I noticed you weren't on Facebook anymore. Yeah.
And so I don't even know what that is about. I have no idea. The only thing I can think of is I made an offhand comment about starting someone said they were thinking about made a comment under one of my posts on Trump's tariffs about starting a bourbon smuggling operation so we could get some of that Kentucky bourbon in Canada, because some of our provinces were banning it. And I said, sure, high quality Canadian fentanyl down, Kentucky bourbon back up. And a couple of days later, I was permanently banned from Facebook. So I guess that's it.
Well, I tried to sell a super soaker on Facebook, and that they said take that down.
Oh, because it's a gun.
A super soaker said against our weapons policy. That's the worst thing. Most of this is being done with artificial intelligence. I don't think it's humans doing it. It's so ridiculous. And yet something that's legit, they won't take down. I mean, I think Mark Zuckerberg is probably the worst person in the whole world right now. I really believe that. So should be interesting. And if Alberta does go it alone, what does Canada do? Do they send in the military, or do they just let it happen? I mean, I'd be curious to see how that goes if that does happen.
Yeah, I don't know. I doubt they do, because, like I say, we have a mechanism to secede. It's written into Canadian law how to secede. It's the Clarity Act, and it's a clear question, a clear majority, and I think some consultation with invested stakeholders like First Nations. So I'm sure there's a bunch of legal challenges that could happen, but I think they'd find a way to shut it down.
Yeah,
but, and if the courts shut it down, I don't see any provincial government having enough balls to say, well, screw it, we're going to go our own way anyways, despite what Canadian courts say. We're our own country now. I just don't think that would happen. But I mean, I don't think the Canadian military, if we ever did decide to go it alone, I doubt the Canadian military would do anything. I mean, most of a good chunk of our soldiers already live in Alberta.
Yeah.
I couldn't see them turning on their neighbors and say, no, you have to stay in this stupid country.
Are there protests either for or against Israel up there?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of protests in support of Palestine, I'd say. And I haven't seen much in the way of support for Israel. Most of the people that are interested in protesting are going to be leftists who are sympathetic to Palestinians.
Yeah.
The people that are interested in supporting Israel aren't going to hit the streets and make a bunch of noise because they don't really see the point in it.
Well, so many of our politicians are just plain owned by Israel. I just wondered if it was that way up in Canada.
It's definitely that way. I mean, we're probably sending money to both sides. I'm sure Hamas and the IDF are getting their fair share of the Canadian taxpayer money.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's the thing. I don't want to send these people money. Let them kill each other. Well, Tim, I think we've covered just about everything here. I can't think of anything else. There's certainly I don't know if there's anything else you want to say before we go. It's been good learning about what's going to happen up there. I hope.
And I mean, hopefully you guys will get on board with becoming Canada's 11th province, and we can join a great nation. I think you guys would make a great province.
Go Texas.
Yeah, we need more Texas in Canada. Less Ottawa, more Texas.
Montana might consider that. They're right by you.
No, we wouldn't want to invite you good people into this mess we have. Maybe if we go our own way,
the Texans would never give up their guns. That's the most important thing. They're just
Well, I don't know if you have this down in the US or all, but there's this movement in Canada called Diagolon. Have you heard of this?
Diagolon? No, I haven't heard of that.
Diagolon. They're branded a far right extremist group. I don't know what exactly their beliefs are. It started as a kind of a spoof idea with a kernel of truth to it. Basically, it's the idea that you draw a diagonal line from northern BC down through Alberta, through the States, down to Florida, and that's the perfect country right there. That country should be its own country called Diagolon. And
I've not heard that, but I just looked up. Yeah, it looks interesting. Yes,
I mean, then you get to cut out the worst part of BC, all the west coast of the US and the east coast of the US, and just keep it with the people that value freedom.
Okay, values. Well, it's been great having you on, Tim. Where can we find you out there?
You can find me on X. Just look me up on X. I'll be tweeting there because I'm basically banned from everywhere else.
That's good. Nothing else to say. So please like my novel, subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Please go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. People are giving me money to buymeacoffee.com. And thank you, Tim Moen. It's certainly been good to know what's going on in Canada. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.